he never really dealt with material things. It was always learning how to be an example or learning how to be the leader that he was calling me to be able to fulfill my purpose. So when my parents were together, my mom was told that she was unable to conceive. So her tube was blocked. A lot of things are going on. So they say you can't have children. So she had my sister. It was a miracle, big baby shower, big celebration. I came along probably a good 4 months later. My mom got pregnant with me. So when by the time that she got pregnant with me, she was on drugs, and she was what you call, a clean drug addict. She did her drugs, but she did it in the house. So because she spent a lot of her time high, my father was abusive. So while my mother was pregnant, my father was abusive. He was telling her, get rid of the child. We're going to do with the child. Really putting her down. So he told her to get an abortion. Said he paid for everything. Remind you, they're married. So my mother went to go get an abortion. When she got on the table, she said she never in her life heard God that clear say, do not abort this baby. So she said something in her, of course it was the spirit, made her get up, and she left and just told my dad, I didn't get the abortion. He didn't argue with her, fuss or fight. So during her pregnancy, and it was time for when she went into labor with me, no one was there. So she told my father that she was in labor, and he said, okay, if you have her, by the time I got off work, I'll just come up there. One of those situations. So what people fail to realize is that a lot of times what we as women experience or what is going on in our atmosphere when we are carrying the child, that affects the child. So because a lot of that was going on, I've always had a sense of rejection. So when I was around 6 or 7, my parents divorced. And when they divorced, I became really angry. I started going through things to the point to where they put me in therapy. Like, something is wrong with this girl because I'm 5 or 6 fighting, and there wasn't no little kid scuffle like, oh, stop. I'm fighting to kill at 6. So I'm leaving kids with busted lips, black eyes, fighting for my life. And all the while this was going on, no one around my mother, no one around us was identifying with that I was actually in a warfare or what I was actually dealing with, and that God was conditioning me to be able to function in ministry, to be able to do the will of God. So I remember being probably 3 or 4. So I started encountering spirits real early, and I didn't understand that I was encountering spirits until I got a little bit older. So I remember being super young and like a light literally coming through my window. And when the light came into the window, it looked like the light turned to the human form and then expanded to the point where it looked like wings came up. So I'm terrified. Remember hiding under my covers. I'm like, what's going on? Never say anything to my mother. So as time began to go on, I became, more angry. I became more, just a lot of different things. I began to lie about a lot of things. I began to do just a lot of things that got me in trouble. And the teachers are telling my mom, this girl going to end up dead or in jail. Like, that was it. No one was praying for me. The pastors weren't embarrassing me. If I lashed out, I was lashing out on pastors, anybody. So when I was lashing out or acting out, they would have me coming to the church and repenting. Mind you, I'm 7, 8, 9, a child. So on top of this is making my self-esteem go down. This is making my self-worth go away. A lot of different things, I'm dealing with. Still, while all this is going on, no one is ministering saying, this is what's going on. This child is in a fight for her life. So with that whole situation going on, I went through just a season of darkness to where by the time I became a teenager, all I did was sleep. My mom was like, she lazy. Maybe she need to lose some weight or something. We're going to try to lose her weight. But my mom didn't. I was in a dark place. Every day I began to hear voices. I always would hear this war in my voice, and I began to hear voices at that point. And I didn't know what was going on because, unfortunately, what happens is a lot of churches don't talk about warfare. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times when we raising kids, we raise our children and we raise them to be who we want to be instead of going to God and saying, what's this child's purpose? And if we do that, God can then reveal the purpose of the child, and then we will know, okay, if this child is called as the Messiah of their generation, if they call it to be the Moses, and they're called to be the Joshua of their situation, they don't have to go through some experiences and to be able to obtain anointing even at that young age. But when we go through it as youth, it comes off different, that we just acting out, or we're just being bad, or we're just being rebellious and back talking. So the spirits begin to eventually manifest themselves to where we're in the house and I'm seeing like spirits walk back and forth. So they were so real that I'm like home by myself and I'm like, Mom, calling my mom, calling my sister, like no one's home. So at this time, it began to really scare me, like something is going on. So eventually, a pastor who was very familiar with warfare began to say, she's called to be able to war. She's having these encounters with spirits. Let's do this. But the biggest thing that nobody still touched was that we were dealing with strongholds. We were dealing with, principalities and things like that. And if anybody know what a stronghold, it's a force that the enemy creates to keep us bound, to keep us in. Because the stronghold is created to keep something in and to keep something from being able to penetrate that. So in my family, we dealt with anger. All the men on my father's side were abusive. Everybody were going through these experiences. And while I'm growing up, I didn't know that God was going to use me to be able to break that curse. So I'm going through all these things. So it got to some point where I was 15 and I was in my room and I was just crying. Everything was just dark. My sister like, come on, let's go. I didn't want to go because I didn't feel like anybody. I was heavy set and I was dark, and that's frowned upon. Especially we tend to go with what society deems, deems pleasing or deems popular. So, no one paid me attention. While all my friends dating and things like that, none of the guys are paying me attention. So I'm just in a dark place. And I remember so clear the enemy said, get up and kill yourself. So I'm like, how am I going to do that? So he had me Google the stuff and everything, like really speaking to me. So then he told me to go to the window, told me how to take the screen out the window to, commit suicide. So when I went to the window and I'm about to jump out the window, that's the first time I ever heard God so clearly say, if you die, the world is going to suffer. And I'm like, what's going on? So after that, I remember just outside of my will, just going to sit back down. And then I eventually asked my mother, if anything ever happened to me, do you think the world will be impacted? She stared at me for a long time and eventually said, will be impacted. I don't know about the world. So then after that, we began to go to a ministry. My mom just got up one day and said, we're going to church because we were in and out of church. So we went to church and we didn't have a vehicle at the time, so we walked to the church. So we ended up walking to the church, and before we even got into the door, the bishop of the church began to cover me, and just began to pray and come against, suicide, different things like that. And he began to minister to me, how I feel. No one knew how low my self-esteem was. And he began to minister to that very aspect of me. So soon after that, that's when I met my apostle. I met her through that ministry. We began to walk together, but before we started walking together, she was our Sunday school teacher. And, as a teenager, you don't want to be around somebody that's always talking God. Like, you want to kind of do your thing, So she gave all of us a car, was like, call us. But no one's like, we're not calling her because we're just going to be praying and speaking in tongues. And she going to have us, doing all this stuff and reading Bible scriptures and Bible verses and stuff like that. So one day, outside of my will, I threw her card away that I knew of. And one day, I just happened to find her card. And I called her. She was like, oh, I'm glad you called. Come over. So as we began to walk together, that was my first time seeing a true woman of God. Seeing a woman be single and live a life, of abstinence. Seeing a woman be single and listen to her conversation. I didn't hear her gossiping. I didn't do anything like that. So a lot of times when we walk in the anointing and we doing what God is supposed to do, our spirits are going to automatically rest on people. So a lot of times there's not nothing that we have to say, and that's what begins to happen. And during that whole time, God kept me from so much stuff, and that's because I began to cleave to ministry. Not just to her, but I began to cleave ministry. I knew that I began to get convictions that I couldn't do certain things, that I couldn't go out, that I couldn't have certain conversations, that I couldn't drink, that I couldn't smoke. But outside of that, God immediately started dealing with my character. He started telling me, if you are going to be effective in ministry, you can't talk to people like that. God just began to break me. And that's when I began to understand and realize, God used her and God began to minister to me about what my purpose was, of being able to break strongholds, being able to minister to broken women and being able to tell somebody that they had more purpose, that they were royal priesthood. Because when I was just reading the word of God, began to say that, he took a people that weren't a people. And that at one time the Gentiles would begin to look at them and talk about them, but then it will become a point where they will begin to now look at us and be encouraged and empowered by our walk, because a lot of times we are the only God that anybody will ever see. You know, a lot of people are not going to come to the church. They're not going to open up a Bible. They're not going to go on YouTube and probably listen to a message because the church had been disgraced. But God wants to be able to use us to do a lot of things, and that's what God did. So it got to a point where I didn't, like I said, I didn't have a lot of experience. When I backtrack a little bit, when I was 13, I was in this program at church, and the church was teaching women how to be chaste women. You know, how to wait until they get married, and all the other girls like, prom night, I'm doing it this day. Everybody had their dates planned out. And as I'm listening to the lady talk about it, I'm like, I think I want to wait. You know, I'm like 13, you know, going through and stuff. I'm like, I think I want to wait. I didn't really know what it was to be in a relationship. A lot of girls were older. So I remember being in church, and I said, God, I want to wait until I get married. And thanks be to God, I'm still waiting. Amen. But I remember just being there and, you know, going through that and just having the experiences with men. You know, a lot of people like, how in the world are you waiting, you know, at your age? And things like that. And it's a matter of, it is strategies, you know, that God has given me to be able to stay, to know how to deal with women. And the biggest thing is, it stopped being about April a long time ago. You know, when I look, I have goddaughters and I have nieces and I have friends. When I look at them, I don't want to do it because so many people are relying on me to live. And I hear a lot like, April, if you go down, I'm going down too. But I'm not going down. You know, people look at how to respond because it's a lot of times we deal with situations or we deal with circumstances based off of our flesh and based off of what we know about that individual, where God is trying to teach us how to be kingdom-minded. You know, He's trying to teach us how to be able to deal with people, because at the end of the day, God wants His glory to be revealed. So it's cute when His glory revealed, we behind the pulpit preaching, but what about, you know, behind closed doors? We get into an altercation or we hear something about an individual. The question is, how are we handling that? And my whole testimony has been based on that. God dealing with me being in ministry. You know, I remember had like what I thought was a rebellious stage. I'm like, I'm going to the club. I was like 16. And went to the club, I'm dancing. And, you know, a bunch of girls, my sister was like, we got to go. I was like, why? She was like, April, you don't belong here. Like, why would you say that? This was my only time to have fun. And you said that, so I tried to be rebellious. I really did. I tried to drink. I tried to do a lot of stuff. Like, I remember one time, I was like, this is it. I'm going to go get me some, right? So I'm like, let me take my nap first and take my shower. I was psyched up. It started snowing. And I'm like, it wasn't supposed to, to the point, so I'm hurrying. I'm like, let me get out before it snows. By the time I got out the house, it was a full-blown blizzard. Like, if I would have went, I'm like, I'm probably going to die if I go. Like, let me stop and let me just chill out. You know, let me sit down. So a lot of times people say it doesn't take all that. It takes all that and more, because we dealing with forces that are greater than us. And we're in this time and age, especially with this generation, you know, that we're just dealing with a lot of things. And what we sometimes fail to forget or realize is that, you know, we look a lot of stuff on the media, you know, social media. And the reality is that is more prevalent or more current with our kids, so they have access to a lot of things. But media just simply means medium. So what the enemy is doing is using that to get to our youth. And that is ministered to our youth all the time. So that's why I don't listen to certain things. That's why I don't watch certain things on TV. And I've grown to understand my seasons. You know, as a woman, I got to know, wintertime, I have to pray and fast a little bit more. Because everybody know that's cuddle season. You know, so I have to be careful. Like, my inbox be blowing up during winter. Because it's cuddle season. So everybody thinks, I don't need no friends. God have to tell me. That's basically how it has to go, because we just have to be mindful on how we carry ourselves. You know, how we dress, how we do a lot of things. And like I said, I can't stress enough, a lot of things that we do would never be for us. You know, when I was listening to Little Experience, I went through homelessness myself. You know, growing up when my mom left my father, she never had to work because my dad took care of her. So then we were in women's space, we were in shelters, going through all the things, you know. And those testimonies, they really minister to somebody. When I hear just a lot of different things that people went through, you know, I thank God, because those testimonies is what keep me. Little things like that teach me how to deal with my finances, how to be careful with the surroundings I pick, you know, who my friends are. Anytime somebody comes in my life, I pray. And I submit that relationship with God. Because even though they say we can be cool, we click and everything, every relationship, it has to be God-led, because it's not, something might break out. So if I pray to God about this relationship and we have a falling out, I know that there's God still telling me to pursue the relationship possibly, that we didn't get into this relationship just because, we thought we was cool, but God wants to do something with that. So for the most part, that's been my life. And before I moved, so I moved to Minnesota for 6 years, like 6 or 7 years ago. And at the time, I was in college. And when I was in college in North Jersey. What ended up happening was they ran out of rooms. They was like, this never happened before. So they were like, you got to stay in a hotel that was like 6 miles away. But you can't park your car on the campus, and we're going to charge you to park your car. Well, what kind of deal was that? So at that point, I was forced to go to county college. So I'm crying because, mind you, I graduated from high school with 3.9 GPA. My SAT was through the roof. Like, I was, not to brag, but I'm like, super smart. So first of all, when it was time for me to apply to colleges, every college was denying me, and I'm crying. And I'm like, why are these colleges denying me? And it was to the point where my guidance counselors calling the schools because they're looking at individuals whose GPAs were terrible, things like that. Like, why isn't she getting in? They were like, we just decided we didn't want her. So I'm like, I don't want you, I'm upset about it. Like, I don't want you neither. So finally, when I got accepted to Montclair, I went for a semester. Like I said, they ran out of rooms. So I couldn't come back the next semester because we couldn't afford it. So at that point, I went to Mercer County for about a year. Like, who changes colleges this much, So I went to Mercer County for a year, and when that year was coming to an end, God said, go to school online. And I'm like, for what? He's like, you're about to travel.
She just came home today.
And I'm telling my pops, I'm like, God
Yeah,
told me to
okay.
go to school online because I'm about to travel. She said, you believe that's what God's saying, you do it. So at that time, online college was super new. So I said, it might be a ghetto education, so I was scared. But I did it anyway. I ended up going to school online, and then lo and behold, her husband got married, and we moved to Minnesota. So I'm like, okay, so that way because my desire at that time was not being in a relationship. It was not doing anything, but at that time, my heart was for ministry. I wanted to do ministry. I just wanted to do the will of God. That's where I was at. I had been through so much, and I watched God bring me out of so much darkness. I said, all I want to do is your will. So when it came to God, I was a young nerd, like, when it came to God. Like, I was studying, I was super young, fasting. Mom was like, well, why you not eating? Because I'm fasting. Like, you too young to be doing that much fasting. And I'm like, no, I'm not. Like, I do, because I was dealing with strongholds, I can't get over that. Because God was calling me to break so many generational curses, I had to go through a harsh time of God breaking my character. Like I said, I was angry. I was that type of youth. So I had to go through that much prayer, that much fasting, that much conditioning for God to be able to use me. Because how he was going to use somebody who was angry and was able to be able to talk to, people. Because I was the type where I would pop off on the pastor. It didn't matter who you were. Like, I didn't have a respect for anybody. So it got to that point where I ended up moving to Minnesota, and I was there for 6 years, left my family, left everybody, and down there we began to pursue ministry. But what began to happen with school was every time a new semester came, something went on the IRS, something went on the financial aid. So it took 9 years to get a 4-year degree. In 9 years, I could have had my PhD. And then at that time, on top of that, I wanted to be a doctor, but God changed my whole career and said, instead, go to school for this. So it was a lot of devastation going on, but I was at that point where I was so submissive to God, where I said, God, I'm going to do your will whichever way you take me. And I had got to that point where I became okay with that, I didn't have a lot of friends. I didn't hang with a lot of people because God was always dealing with my heart. He was always dealing with how I presented myself. He was always dealing with my spirit. So I eventually graduated, and right before I graduated, I'm like, okay, it's finally about to be, and that's when God reminded me. I'm like, God, I had to go through all this for a 4-year degree, like it's not that serious. And then that's when God reminded me, I was the first one in generations to go to college. Nobody in my family went from college. They did go to college, they ended up dropping out. So for me to be able to break that generational curse, I had to go through that. Because in my family, on my mother's side of the family, they're okay. Like, they live, like, okay lives. Like, none of my cousins are in and out of jail, they're not doing bad. They live very comfortably. And a lot of times, we only run to God when something is wrong. So people don't understand that sometimes when things are okay, like in the world, a lot of people say, You know, when you in the world, you have this, and they go towards the world. That's a condition that the enemy puts on us, so we won't be able to run to God. But when we've been through what we've been through, it pushes us into the arms of God. So, of course, eventually I graduated school, and then right after I graduated, my mother, of course, became sick, and then I ended up moving back this way. And, of course, that's when my mother passed. And when she passed, I began to prepare myself because I said, I feel like if she died, I'm going to lose my mind. Like, I didn't know God was that much of a keeper. So when she passed, I had my moment where I began to, mourn and everything, but knowing that I was one that dealt with depression and anxiety and all those different things, I just watched God keep me through that. And, and now we're at the moment where God is still doing it, always dealing with April with character, always dealing with how I address things and how I approach different, circumstances. And sometimes it's difficult because sometimes I don't want to be that pleasant, when I have to deal with something. And sometimes I don't want to see God on that wise, But my leader, she always, say, she never stresses enough, like, it's not about you. And once we get that through our head, we're okay because we have to be able to obtain anointing to be able to break yokes. And what's going on too is a lot of us have broken yokes, but if anybody know what a yoke is, it's like what they put over the animals to be able to control them. So if you break it, it's broken, but the only time you're going to see a manifestation is if we physically move out of the situation. So until we, like a lot of us, want to come out of different things. Like we say, Lord, I'm dealing with lust, I'm dealing with anger, but we keep putting ourselves in situations. If you know you're dealing with lust, certain things we shouldn't watch on TV. That's just the reality. Certain music we shouldn't listen to. Certain atmospheres I don't go in because I have to keep my body. Then on top of that, I have to keep my spirit. Because back in the day, I did parties. We did the house parties. We was fast. We was fighting. We were doing things like that. So certain atmospheres I don't go to because I know I can't revert back. I look at women like you all. I look at the ones I'm surrounded with, and I think about the ones who God have to have me in the future. I have to be in a position at any time to be able to be used by God. I can't have a down day. Some people say, you just got a more group. No. Because what happens is if we have a down day, that's it. And he about to have a ball game with us. Mm-hmm. And it was weird, and I never really shared this. When my mom passed, she came to me that day, and that's the only time I seen her. Like, the next thing was like, get over it. And I'm like, what you mean? I'm like, going off. Like, she was like, get over it. Like, move on with your life. Keep going. And it broke me to even hear that. But I'm like, what you mean? And while everybody's saying more, like, people want to see me cry. They want to see me cry. God, like, get over it. And the crazy thing was, it was a season where I was at, wits with my mom. And I believe Overseer Jeanette know a lot about this because my mom didn't understand. And it wasn't until, her last days that she thanked God for how I cleaved to ministry, how I cleaved to apostle. Because remind you, have a 50-year-old that's spending time with somebody else. She's telling all her things, all her secrets, everything she's going through with somebody else. But if that individual is the one that's going to get your child to your destiny, and we got to let them go. And it's better to let them go that way versus letting them go to the streets. And I'm telling you, I look at my life, and I look at my sister's life, and we are polar opposites, We both dealt with the void of not having their father. And while she went towards me, it caused me to reject men. So God had to do a whole healing because I hated men. And when I fought nothing but guys. Girls were in competition. But it was like guys were talking. My dad was the first man to ever break my heart. So with that being said, it caused me to resist. But with that happening, it worked for my good because it allowed me to be able to keep myself. Yes. To be careful. Yes. And I say every day,